Well, it's a joy again to be with you folks tonight. The subject is the crisis of the secular mind. You can see the picture of the fisherman throwing the fish away. I thought I'd start with this famous story about this fisherman was fishing, and every time he catches a big fish, he throws the fish back into the lake, and the bystander would be watching him, ask what is the matter with him, that he throws back the fish that are large in size. He said, I only got an 8-inch frying pan. The big fish won't fit. And I was thinking that the humanists, the secularists, the atheists have an 8-inch frying pan. God is too big to get into the frying pan. So they do not include God in their life because God is too big for them. And that's a good illustration. I find this a very helpful illustration because God is greater than the humanistic philosophy. God is greater than the metaphysics of the atheist. And so if we know who God is, then we can adjust our frying pan. But if you do not know who God is, then you're randomly moving in the universe without any direction. Some years ago in the state of New York, a man was standing on a bridge contemplating suicide. A policeman walked up to the person and said, give me 10 minutes of your time. And if I could persuade you not to jump, that would be great. But if I can't convince you in 10 minutes, I'll give you another 10 minutes. And if you can convince me in 10 minutes that life isn't worth living, I'll let you jump. The story goes, two of them held their hands together and both jumped. Now, that story poses a question about the meaning of life. Why do we live? Why are we here? Where are we going? What is the purpose and meaning? So that will be the burden of my message in the light of secular mind. The secularist is a person who believes that God doesn't matter. Religion doesn't matter. What matters is my life here and now. No God before me, no God behind me. There is no spiritual realities. All that matters is my personal feeling, reason, philosophy, and pleasure. In fact, in the United States, some years ago, a single farmer, decided to put an ad in the paper looking for a wife. So he put an ad, it says, farmer, age 35, looking for a lady, age 35, with a tractor. And then it says, please send picture of the tractor. That is a secular humanist. What matters is matter, not mind, the creator. So let's explore this. I like what Augustine, the brilliant mind. Augustine says, men go abroad to wonder at the heights of the mountain, the waves of the sea, the long courses of rivers, the vast compass of the ocean, the circular motions of the star, and they pass by themselves without wondering. This statement is worth tonight's lecture. Augustine is a brilliant mind. He poses the right question. We spend our time in the world. We engage in business. We go to university. We get involved in sports. We do all kinds of secular activity, but we don't ask the question, why? Why are we here? What is the purpose of our existence? Are we just random molecules floating in this universe? Is there something bigger? Does God exist beyond our physical universe? So here comes the humanist, the secularist, the atheist. They say, just live for the moment. As the American ad says, grab all the gusto you can get because you only go once. Well, that's a false dogma. How do you know life just ends at the grave? How do you know that there is no other realities beyond our reality? So the wise person will explore. Life is too expensive to eat spaghetti. Life is too expensive just to engage in sports. We need to ask the big question. We need to wonder at the creation of God and then find the clue. As we look at the issue of truth and the mind that we have, I think it is worth looking at Moto My Adler. This gentleman is the chairman of the Encyclopedia Britannica. Many of you may have had the set. I did buy a set. In fact, I got an extra set to give away. Moto My Adler spent nearly 70 years debating about God. 70 years. He read the best argument for God and the best argument against God. And after years of research, he came to the conclusion that God exists, got baptized at his later age, and became a Christian. He says, I suspect that most of the individuals who have religious faith are content with blind faith. They feel no obligation to understand what they believe. They may even wish not to have their belief disturbed by thoughts. But if God is whom they believe created them, the intellectual and rational powers, then that imposes upon them the duty to try to understand the creed of their religion. Not to do so is to verge on superstition. And he's right. We have a mind that is so amazing, and it deserves bigger ideas. Our mind must relate to God. So the crisis of the secular mind. What is the first crisis? Well, I pose this to the secularists because there is a crisis of truth. What is truth is the most fundamental question. Today, our generation is not asking that question any longer. One time, it dominated our universities. Our universities were center for learning, and theology was at the center of the program because theology unifies all the diversities, and truth was the unifying factor. But sadly today, we have ignored the concept of truth, and we say truth is relative. We say truth is subjective, or truth is not possible. Truth is an illusion, but truth matters. Plato said, I've done the best I can if I only had a raft of revelation to carry me over the sea of doubt. Ludwig Wittgenstein says, the great Austrian philosopher, man never has sufficient perspective from within the world to build an eternal structure of truth and value. Truth does exist. There is physical, chemical truth, biological truth. There is historical truth, but there's also philosophical truth, metaphysical truth, and spiritual truth. And Jesus came and said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That is a very powerful statement. Plato says, just as the heart is designed for love, the mind is designed for the truth. I wish I invented that phrase. It is so true. Our heart is designed for truth. Rather, our mind is designed for truth. And our heart is designed for love. And Why does such a capacity exist? Because that is another confirmation that God exists. And the Christian worldview fits the reality of the universe. God says,
Too many people using
we
it.
need his love, and we all need his love, and we need the truth. Truth is too precious to ignore. Truth is fundamental for living. When we have discovered the truth, we are happy people. We are contented people because we are made for the truth. We are made to engage in the truth, and we have to glorify the truth. Sadly, our 21st century is a century that denies truth in the context of postmodernism, relativism, mysticism, fideism, and so forth. I like what Richard Pertl, brilliant philosopher, I had some correspondence with him years ago. In fact, he sent me all of his books. He's a philosopher from Washington State. And Richard Pertl, in fact, brilliant philosopher, he wrote Logic for Philosophers, Logical Thinking and Logic for Philosophers. So he's a heavyweight. And this is what he says, if our thinking is caused by non-rational causes of any kind, there is no reason to suppose that our thinking is valid. And he's right. Any view but the Christian view support this. The evolutionary view, the atheistic view, the humanistic view poses serious problem, because in the light of natural humanism and atheism, truth does not exist, because our thinking is not related to reason, because you can't get reason coming from non-reason. So Pertl is right. If our reasoning is caused by random accident, then there is no meaning to our thinking. You see, we live in God's universe, created by God himself. In the context of that reality, truth is possible because God is the ultimate truth. And he's interested in truth because God is the truth. Jesus said, you shall worship God in spirit and in truth. When we follow God, we follow the truth, and we are satisfied by the truth. The secular humanist has a crisis of truth. He has no way of knowing the truth in the light of his system, in the light of his frying pan. He can't get out of that limited frying pan. So in Christianity, we have a God that understands, a God who is the truth. Well, I thought I'll throw this quickly. There are 4 ways or 4 doors by which people perceive truth. One is science, the scientific truth. They say what is verifiable by the 5 senses is true. That's one way. Then there is the experientialist who says truth is what you experience. It's gut level experience, and truth is what you experience, this experiential says. Then you got the rationalists. They believe in reason, and they suggest that truth is reason. The fourth is those who say that I believe because it is based on tradition, or based on faith, or based on dogma without question. So what is the Christian answer to the concept of truth? Scientific truth are limited to sensation, what is sensible to our 5 senses. I remember being in Singapore lecturing for a group of Christians, and a lady said to me, could you come and talk to my dad? My dad is a very clever man. He believes in science, and he doesn't believe in God. So could you speak to him? I said, yes, I will. So they arranged for me to meet the father in a restaurant. The whole family came out, and he's a very wealthy man. He makes $30,000 profit every month selling pepper. So he's a pepper man. Hollywood has Superman, Singapore has Pepperman. And so we were in the dining table enjoying this pepper steak. While we were enjoying the steak, the daughter said to the father, "Dad, ask him about God." So he said to me, "My daughter believes in God, but I don't believe in God." I said, "Why don't you believe in God?" He said, "God is not a scientific fact. So God is not proven by science. Therefore, I don't believe in God because it is not a scientific fact." So I said to him, "Let's discuss what science can do and what science cannot do before we talk about God." So I looked at him and I said to him, I asked him this question. His wife was sitting next to him, enjoying the steak. I said to him, "Do you love your wife?" He looked at her for a while and he said, "Yes, I do." I said, "Can you prove to me you love her scientifically?" That was the end of his love. He realized, he said, "That is a good answer." See, you cannot prove many things by science. You can't prove mathematics scientifically. Math is abstract. Science is physiological or sensible, as related to the five senses. Logic, you can't smell logic, you can't touch logic, you can't taste logic, you can't see logic. But logic is mental, logic is abstract. Science deals with concrete, logic deals with abstract properties. Propositions are realities, are truth entities, but they are not sensible. You can't smell and touch and feel reason, but reason does exist, and reason is very vital for discussion and communication. So there are many, so we live in a multidimensional universe. The humanists sadly confine life to a small frying pan. Reality is confined to a limited dimension. So science is a useful tool, but science is not the master of truth. Science is a servant of truth. So we must not put science on the pedestal and say science is everything. So our culture is committed to science, blindly follow science, but sadly science is bankrupt of spiritual realities, rationality, mathematics, etc. So science is a useful tool, but not God. So the humanists who worship science are misled, mistaken. And experience is a useful thing, but experience is an effect of truth, not the essence of truth. Reason is a useful tool, but reason is empty. Reason is like language. You got to have content in it. So you can't worship reason. You can't simply say, "I believe in reason." Reason is a tool. It's like saying, "I believe in my cup." Cup is a tool to get some water. And tradition, well, there are good traditions and bad ones. So still you must analyze the tradition and say whether cannibalism can be a good tradition for some people, but is a bad tradition. So we have to look beyond, and this is where God fits in so beautifully. God is the basis for science, basis for experience, basis for reason, basis for truth. Let me answer a few of the secularist dogma, which is very common in universities and high schools and general media. They say that science is the only sure method for knowing things. Well, if that is the case, can you prove this scientifically? They say only that which is verifiable by science is provable, is true. Well, that itself is not a scientific fact. It is a dogma about science. So this is self-refuting because it is not provable by science itself. What about faith and reason are opposed? The humanists make faith and reason enemies. Well, both are complementary. Reason is useful and faith is necessary because even science depends on causality. Science depends on many assumptions that are not scientifically verifiable, but they're useful axiom for discussion and for experiment. People believe in God because they are needy. Now this is Freudian slip. Freudian assumption, Freud, who popularized such a belief, well, Freud was very limiting. His research is very limited. He only confines to certain aspect of religious people. He never looked at the smart one, people like Einstein, people like Newton, Kepler, Faraday, Simpson, these brilliant minds like Augustine, Descartes, Spinoza. These were brilliant minds, and they came and they believed in God not for these because they were needy. Well, God is God, whether I feel for him or I don't feel for him. He's a reality that transcends my experience. So to suggest people believe in God because they're needy, well, C.M. Joad, the famous philosopher from London University, addressed us. He said, I never felt the need for God, but I believe in him because he's true. So Freud used a genetic fallacy and poisoning the well. He did not really deal with God's accurately. He was very subjective in his research because he had a biased view about God and he projected that view. In fact, there is another book by a Christian psychologist who turned this argument back on the atheist. Atheism is not a belief at all, they say. It is just non-belief. This is not true. Atheists do believe. They are passionate in their belief. They are radical in their presenting of their views. They are passionate. They got the religious zeal. So atheism is a belief because it says there is, the word atheism comes from the word atheos, no God, anti-God. So it is still a belief, even though they say it's not, because they realize their position is not tangible. So they try to change by saying it's a non-belief. No, every one of us are believers. If you don't believe in God, we must believe in matter. We all have a worldview. We don't, as human beings, we have value system, we have moral system, we have metaphysical system, we have commitment. We conceptually, no human being can live without a belief. The only difference is that they redefine the belief. We believe in God. The atheists don't believe in God. But if they don't believe in God, who's their God? Their God is matter. Their God is the force. So no one escapes religious values. That's what surprised me. Some of these journalists who attack Christianity, they say there is no absolute, but they condemn the church and others on moral ground. So this is the most fascinating part. They say there is no God, but then they are so passionate, they're morally committed, and they're morally passionate about their beliefs. So no one escapes morality, no one escapes reality, no one escapes value. So the Christian worldview is the best worldview to explain about life and reality. It's the best worldview that fits reality beautifully because God is wiser than man. God is greater than man. So we have the best worldview that explains reality. So you can discover goodness without God. Let me put it this way. God is the greatest goodness. God is the greatest. So if you deny him, you deny the greatest good. So how can you be good when you have denied the greatest good? Think about that. God is the basis for morality. If God does not exist, then why be good? This is the reality that we must face. So the Christian faith and the Christian is more consistent because he acknowledged there is a God and he's morally good. The atheist says there is no God and he wants to be morally good too. But one has a basis for God, one has a basis for good, the other has no basis. In other words, the atheist is good for nothing because if there is no God, why be good? And that is a difficult question to answer. What about that? All religions are the, well, if you're not a Christian, you tend to think that all religions are the same. But that is a lie. That is not true. All religions are not the same. In fact, I had a debate with the top Baha'i leader in Auckland some years ago. And the question that I asked him was, if all religions are the same, why did you start another one called Baha'i? You can think about that. So if all religions are the same, just join the existing one. And then what is the ground for saying all religions are the same? What is the proof? I spoke to a lady who said, all religions are the same. I said, have you studied the world's religion? She said, no, but they are same anyway. See, that's a biased view, and Christianity is different to all other religion. All other religion says, do. Jesus says, it's done. It's done for you. All religion says, do your best. Jesus said, I've done my best for you. There's a world of difference between world's religions and God's revelation. Christianity is not man's wisdom, it is God's wisdom. Christianity is God coming down to us in search for us. That is the difference. Well, we looked at truth as being relative. I will say that truth is not relative. If truth is relative, this is relative. If this is relative, then this is not the final matter to truth. Only God is qualified to tell us what is truth, because God is all wise, infinite in wisdom, infinite in power, infinite in holiness, and only God the truth. That's why it says so beautifully in John chapter 1, the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. What a beautiful story. What a beautiful statement. The crisis of the mind of the secularists, not only the secularists face the crisis of truth, they face the crisis of who am I? You remember the Beatles' famous song, he's a real nowhere man, sitting in his nowhere land, doesn't have a point of view, knows not where he's going to, isn't he a bit like me and you? This is our generation. When you miss God, when you forget God, then you do not know who you are. Today we have an identity crisis. That is the crisis of the secular mind. Anywhere you go, people don't know who they are. People, because once you cut yourself from the source of your identity, God, your creator, then you will be confused about who you are. Today we have an identity crisis at a monumental proportion. We are lonesome. We are not at home. We don't know where we are. We are lost. Remember the two Australians who went to London? They went to the pub. They got so drunk and they want to leave the pub. They don't know where to go. A distinguished British officer comes with all his medal. And the two Australians looked at the British officer and says, hey, mate, do you know where we are? And the British officer said, young man, do you know who I am? The Aussie said, we are really in trouble because he does not know who he is, and we don't know where we are. And that's where we are. Sadly, to lose the creator is to lose yourself. To lose God is to lose our mind, is to lose ourself. Because what is the source of my soul, my being, my heart, my mind? God is the foundation of my life. When we turn to God, we find joy. We find contentment. We find peace, because we were made, as Augustine said it so beautifully, our hearts are made for thee. And our hearts are restless until they find the rest in thee. It is so beautiful to talk about that. Listen to the Nobel Prize winner who, brilliant mind, amazing ability. And then he asked this profound question: how am I, an atemporal being, imprisoned in time and space, to escape from my imprisonment when I know that outside space and time lies nothing, and that I, in the ultimate depth of my reality, am nothing also? Wow. This is a powerful question, deeply philosophical, amazing. The one problem Beckett makes is he thinks this universe is all that there is. The Christian view is this world is not my home. This world is not the only world. There's another world. There is a spiritual dimension. But sadly, through his humanistic values, he failed to see it. But look at it. He said, to escape from my imprisonment in time. And he knows that outside times lies nothing. In the ultimate depth of reality, I'm nothing also. Well, if God does not exist, we are nothing. If there is no God, we are just empty vessel, mindless molecules, just an accidental atom. This is a cruel idea. When man rejects God, he hurts himself. When we turn back to God, we find hope, we find meaning, we find purpose, we find direction. We are created for a purpose. And when we go to God, we find our source. Pascal says, there is a God-shaped vacuum in our hearts, which only God can fulfill. I feel when people come to God, the humanist crisis is this. There is a big difference between choosing ice cream flavor and choosing a medicine. When it comes to ice cream, you choose what you like. With medicine, you choose what heals. Today, people think of God like they think of ice cream, a matter of taste. They choose according to their taste, not according to the truth. The most important question is not how I feel or what I like, but is it true? This is the fallacy of our generation. Our generation doesn't ask deeper questions. Oprah Winfrey says, a God that does certain things is not my God. So she defines God according to her own thinking. The God of the universe is the greatest good. He is not part of the universe. He is a transcendent being, because if God created the universe, he must be bigger than the universe. So we can't see his body in the universe, because that's limited. God is unlimited. And therefore, I was teaching at Whangarei Boys High many years ago. You may not know this. Nicole Kidman's husband, Keith Urban, came from Whangarei, born in there. And I was a teacher at Whangarei Boys High. And while I was teaching there for 6 months, I would engage with the teachers at the high school. I remember one time our school teacher said to me, "So you believe in God?" I said, "Yes, I do." "What about you?" He said, "I don't believe in God." I said, "Don't you believe in the greatest truth? Don't you believe in the greatest love? Don't you believe in the greatest value? Don't you believe in the greatest power? Don't you believe in the greatest beauty? Don't you believe in the greatest energy? Don't you believe in the greatest person?" That's what God is. And he took a different attitude after hearing my statement. The world needs to know who really God is, because the world has redefined God and dismissed him. And that is sadly a tragic event. The scientific objection that comes from humanists is, it's a fallacy, because it begs the question. Because when a person says, unless you could prove God's physically, I will not believe him, is false, because God is not a physical entity to be proven. It's also a categorical fallacy. It's like asking, what is the taste of blue? Or what is the smell of 2 + 2? So we are committing the categorical fallacy by asking God to come into another category, our category. It's also reductionistic in the sense that science that is totally biased towards metaphysics is reductionistic, in the sense that reductionism is fallacious, because life is more than an item. We live in many dimensions. Our human being is intellectual, moral, physical, spiritual. So we can't simply look at one side. A love letter has a powerful message, but you can't just analyze the ink and paper and conclude there is nothing to it. So a chemical description of God is a misrepresentation of his essence. And of course, it's also a generalization. The third is the moral crisis. When a person rejects God, the person has no basis for morality. So the humanists change their moral ideas to suit their thinking. But there is a serious crisis. How do we go fight against racism? How do we fight against child abuse? How do you fight for women's rights? These are fundamental questions, but humanism has no basis for morality. Jean-Paul Sartre, the famous atheist, said, if God does not exist, all things are possible morally. And he's right, because morality is, God is moral. And when we reject him, we also reject his moral basis. In fact, Bertrand Russell himself confirms my argument. Unless you assume the existence of God, the question of life's meaning and purpose is irrelevant. Finally, is the crisis of hope. What can we hope for in this world? What about hope? Today we live without hope. Woody Allen put it beautifully. He says, more than any time in history, mankind faces a crossroad. One path leads to destruction, the other path leads to despair. Let us pray that we might have the wisdom to believe correctly. Well, this is where the world is at. Without God and without hope, as the scripture says. But there is hope. That's why Jesus came. He came to a hopeless world. He came with a purpose. He came with power. He came with a proof. So Christianity is not a blind faith. It is a meaningful faith. It's a faith that has sustained the Western world so beautifully. Democracy, university, art, and music came out of the good. So by turning back to God, we can make a difference in this world. That's one of the reasons I'm committed to apologetic, because it opens the mind of the doubter, opens the mind of the skeptic, help the skeptic to be open-minded to the truth. Okay, with that, we'll have some questions.
Steve, thank you. You were on fire tonight. That was amazing.
Thank you.
My wife and I were spellbound. So do you just have all those quotes in your head?
Well, I love those quotes, so I just natural, I guess. Some of them are just brilliant ones, and I live on them.
I'm waiting for some questions from others, but I would like to know, a lot of people in the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century have talked about the downfall of the West, and its poverty philosophically because of secularism and atheism. Where do you think, and this is a big question, I don't know if you can answer, but where do you think the West is headed historically? And yeah, it's a big question, but how would you deal with that?
Well, sadly, the West has turned its back on God, and the first 100 universities that was built in the American soil were built by the church: Harvard, Yale, Princeton, the Ivy League. And you influence politics. In God we trust. So God was the foundation of the Western world. Universities were open to study God. So today we have forgotten God. That's why we have all kinds of problems, violence. I met Madeline O'Hare, who took Bible reading and prayer out of the public school. And her son, of course, who was responsible for taking Bible out of school, said, since he did that, the schools were, in fact, and I was at Ohio, I was going to school with her, studying with a guy from New Jersey. And he said, the teachers in America's, in that school in New Jersey have to lock themselves because for fear of being raped by the students. Now you take God out of public school, take God out of education. If God is not the source of knowledge, then, Jeffrey Dahmer, the famous Milwaukee murderer, was asked the question, how could you kill people so brutally? How could you do that? He said, I don't believe in God. God would not judge me because there is no God to judge me. So atheism gave him a freedom to kill. And thank God, most atheists are not into killing. But logically, if there is no God, there is no absolute, there is no morality. So I believe America today and the West is going away from moralities, moving away from absolute moral behavior, moral values. And so we see the decline. And so, like this good example, New Zealand. When I came to New Zealand in the 70s, it was a beautiful society. People say good day. And people many homes had no lock. They don't lock the doors. Today, the police force has increased because crime has gone up so badly. So when you take the moral God out of the society, you will have immorality. And that's what we're seeing today. So sadly, the West is going downhill. The church need to wake up with good, sound message. We have to present the gospel in a way that people can make sense. And so, yeah, sadly, we are going downhill. I'm excited that you folks are doing something for the youth. Our youth need to be reached because they are the future leaders. But the church forgotten the youth by and large, and they go to university and they lose the faith. So, but it's a sad. But who knows what God has on the other side.
This question is from Patricia. She works with someone who is a member of Skeptics New Zealand. He claims to have read the Bible, but Christians don't know their Bible. In her thought, he's both right and wrong. He hasn't met the right Christians who do know their Bibles. What do you think is the best way for Patricia and all of us to demonstrate the truth of Jesus to someone like the skeptic?
Well, first of all, to ask, why don't you believe in God? And then deal with that. That's a good question. Why do you reject Christianity? What do you have against Christianity? What's your reason for not believing in the Christian faith? So reading the Bible doesn't qualify you to be a judge. It only means that you've done some work, but you still have to deal with your philosophical basis for belief or unbelief. So apologetic is scratching where people are itching. Okay, if you don't believe in God, why are you moral? What's your basis for truth? What's your basis for value? What's your basis for your worldview? What do you believe? So we need to do pre-evangelism before we can do evangelism. So we need to shock people with, questions like, why are you moral? Now, if there is no God, I was in Christchurch. I was taking a flight from Christchurch to Auckland, and next to me sat a guy as a former Christian, he says. He used to be a Christian, and he was reading Stephen Hawking's book in his hand. He was holding it. So I said, how do you find him? He says, I'm just getting into it. So I said, what do you believe? He said, I'm a humanist. So I said, if you're a humanist, how do you explain your wife? He's a married man. I said, is your wife just a bunch of molecules? So when you see her, you say, good morning, my floating atoms? No. And then what is love to you? When you say, I love you, is just chemicals reacting to another chemicals? Chemicals don't fall in love, but people do. So atheism is bankrupt of morality, bankrupt of value, bankrupt. We can't explain love. We want to love, but how do you justify love in a mechanical universe? Only the Christian faith answers the question of love, because if God exists, he's love. God is the greatest love. And we can justify love because God is love.
Thanks, Steve. Evan asks, when we talk with people, we are often not arguing logic, but rather spiritual darkness, particularly in the West. No matter how logical our discussion sounds to us, it seems unreasonable to them. So how do we close such a discussion?
Well, the trouble with that statement is the generalization, that's because I was convinced by evidence. A lot of my people that I've been, there's many, C.S. Lewis was convinced by the evidence. C.M. Joad was convinced by the evidence. Josh McDowell was convinced by the evidence. So I can't simply say there is a certain amount of truth to that. There are certainly people are in darkness, but the mind is still functioning. The mind is not, in fact, B.B. Warfield from Princeton used to suggest that. He's a Reformed scholar, and he used to say, although man is fallen, he's not totally lost. Otherwise, if your reason is totally gone, you can't date anyone. You can't order McDonald's. You can't catch a bus because your brain is still operative. So to say that the brain, and furthermore, it's also a reflection of Paul went to Mars Hill and spoke to those pagan philosophers, if they're all in thought. So Paul reasoned with them, so reason is used all over scripture. So it is true there's darkness in people's mind. There are a certain amount of darkness, but there's also light people will see. People are looking for light. That's the paradox of life.
Steve, thank you so much. We don't have time for any more questions. We need to take a break, but thank you, everyone. This talk will be posted on YouTube and on the Firm Foundation page. And Steve, do you want to introduce what you're going to be talking about tomorrow morning?
Well, I've been so I think 20 Reasons, is that the one? I think
is the Bible the Word of God?
Okay, all right, yes. I have a chapter in my book, Is the Bible I've read all the books I could possibly read on the subject before I wrote it. So I will share part of that portion. Yes.
Good. And I want to encourage everyone to check out Steve's book on Amazon. It's called Christianity for Skeptics. So I've
Jeff,
bought it, and I have some copies here in Dunedin. So let me know if you want to buy one for $10, a really good deal.
Jeff, you know that I showed that to Josh McDowell, and he said, Steve, this is better than all my book. And Hollywood gave me an award for that book. Hollywood has an Angel Award. The lady who did the movie called Touched by an Angel, she promoted that book. She suggested that book deserved an award. So they gave it for the cartoon.
Wow. I didn't know you were a Hollywood star. That's amazing. Okay. Well, let's take a break for 5 minutes and put a log on the fire, get a hot drink, and we'll see you back for Todd Funk and his talk on Darwinism. It's going to be good. So thanks, Steve, and we'll see you in
Thank you.
5.